My cat Freddie loves to be brushed and cuddled. But stirring up his cat allergens meant sneezing and itchy eyes. Then I found Purina One Live Clear. It's cat food that reduced the major allergen and my suffering in as little as 21 days. Now, we feel closer than ever. If you have issues with cat allergens, you really need to try Purina One Live Clear.
Try new Purina One Live Clear today. Purina One, a difference from day one.
It's The Other Side of Midnight with Frank Morano.
This is The Other Side of Midnight. I'm Frank Morano. Now, a lot of you may think, what does one former mayor in one city in New York have to do with the price of eggs a week before Easter? Well, more than you might think, because the story of Stephanie Miner, the former mayor of Syracuse, is a fascinating one. Not only is it a fascinating personal memoir, but the story of what has happened to Syracuse, both the good things and the bad things, is totally illustrative of some of the problems our country has had, some of the opportunities that our country may have before it. And she's always been a public official that I've really admired. I think in her career in public life, the fact that she's been such an independent voice may have caused her a few headaches, but it certainly scored her a lot of points in the Frank Morano playbook. I think to date, she's only made maybe one political decision that I've taken issue with, which, if time permits, we'll get into. But now she is the author of a new book called Madam Mayor, Love and Loss in an American City. It's available on Amazon and wherever books are sold. And I'm telling you, wherever you live, anywhere in the country, you're about to hear someone who's not only made history, but grappled with the tension between idealism and realpolitik. Madam Mayor, it is great to have you on the program. Good to talk to you again.
Well, Frank, I just wish my mother were listening. That's just such a great introduction. I'm glad I'm going to tape it but it's a pleasure to be on your show and talk about these issues. And obviously I can tell by just your introduction, we had talked about making sure that you had read the book, and you obviously have. I can tell that. So your listeners should know that you don't just talk about books that you haven't read like some people in the media do.
Well, I appreciate that. Now, you've titled the book Madam Mayor. A two-part question here. Who were you when you weren't Madam Mayor? And why are you writing this book now? What are you hoping people take out of this book?
Well, when I wasn't Madam Mayor, I was on the city council first, so I was Councilor Minor. And by training, I am a labor lawyer. And so I did that for 15 years before I got into politics full time. I wrote the book because what I liked about politics, why I got into politics and local government in particular, was this idea that you could make positive change for the people that lived around you, your neighbors, a city, and a place where my family and my ancestors came to, and my aunts and uncles and cousins, we all grew up here. And so I've just felt this tremendous connection to Syracuse, and I wanted to make it a better place, and I thought that I could do that in local politics. And I wrote the book to explain and show people how interconnected everything is, and why sometimes when you think, why is there a housing crisis? Why can't we just fix housing, for example? You start to understand how interrelated our government is and how you need everybody to be on the same page, and how various constituencies and egos, how they often fight against each other to impede progress, particularly in the political culture that we have right now, which seems to celebrate, pithy sound bites or TikTok videos as opposed to substance and ideas and really hashing out answers to, long simmering civic problems.
What a great description. And as somebody that's in the midst of running for my first election in 14 days, I can totally empathize. With that in mind, do you think politics makes people better or worse versions of themselves? Or is there potential for both?
Well, I think there's the potential for both. And sometimes, both can happen to you in the same day. You can be the best version of yourself or the worst version of yourself. But I think over a period of time, what politics does and the pressure of it shows who you really are. So I don't think that you can judge or should judge an elected official or a candidate by any one appearance or any one thing that they say. But over a period of time, you can tell, I think, who they are and who they, where their priorities are and why they're really interested in politics. A lot of people do it because they like seeing their name in bold print. A lot of people do it because they like having a title. But there are still a lot of people who do it, particularly in local government, because it's not as glamorous. In fact, I'm not sure that glamour can be associated, that word, with anybody in politics these days. But local government, you can't run away from your constituents for the most part. You leave your house in the morning, you go to the grocery store, you go to church. You're going to run into people who say, hey, Mayor, how come my trash wasn't picked up? Or somebody broke into my car last night and it took the police 4 hours to come and take a report. Or why is my water not working when I turn the faucet on? And so in order to be in local politics, you want to have to solve those problems. And you got to like people. You got to be flexible. And understand that people are going to come at you in all different ways and shapes, and the variety of the human experience is fascinating to me, and I think to most good mayors it's fascinating, but to people who don't like that, it can be very threatening.
Talking with Stephanie Miner, the former mayor of Syracuse. She's the author of the book, Madam Mayor. Stephanie, we have a lot of listeners outside of New York. We have a lot of listeners in Western New York and upstate New York, but we have listeners listening in Wisconsin and Michigan and a lot of Ohio, a lot of places that during the 1990s, early 2000s saw the same exodus of manufacturing jobs that Syracuse did. I'm curious what you think needs to be done on a national level to rebuild some of those cities, Syracuse, Detroit, other similarly situated cities that were a powerhouse 50 years ago, but in the aftermath of a lot of these jobs being moved offshore, now find themselves needing to reinvent themselves.
Well, I think, Frank, that's also one of the reasons that I wrote this book. Syracuse was a place of tremendous prosperity, and in a generation, it became a place where it had the opposite numbers. And so across our country, we have seen places that were really prosperous, and then all of a sudden they said there were places filled with poverty. How did that happen? Well, one of the ways that it did happen is because we as our country turned away from having a policy towards saying we're going to improve our economy and make sure that we make investments. And I have a view, Frank, that government should do what it's good at. So government should do infrastructure and put out fires and arrest bad guys. And in Syracuse, this is very important, clear snow and pick up trash. Government's very good at those kind of things. What I think government isn't good at is economic development. And what we've seen in this country in places like Wisconsin with Foxconn, or in Ohio or New York with the Solar City program, or even this huge competition that went across our country for, the Amazon HQ2 headquarters. What we've seen is this sort of perverse Robin Hood where we take taxpayer dollars from, people who need it, and then we give it to rich billionaires, and we don't, we hope and pray that they will develop what they say. And then when we don't, politicians have moved on, often with, their pockets filled with campaign contributions. And people are saying, well, what happened? How did this happen? How did we take these really hardworking taxpayer dollars and give them to billionaires and get nothing in return? And so I think what we have to say is, look, we need to have a government that works towards solving problems for its people and not easy one-shot solutions in the guise of economic development.
Which is harder, fixing a pothole or fixing a pension system? And why do voters only seem to reward one of those things?
I think that they're both hard, but I think pensions systems, rewarding or fixing those issues is harder because it's on a longer time frame. Mm-hmm. And, we as Americans have, and particularly now as Americans, we have sort of this instant gratification mindset. We want it quick. We want to do it. We want to fix it. We want to move on. With our deep-seated issues, the reason they're deep-seated and they haven't been solved is because you can't do that. You need to have focused attention to it. And when you're talking about something like a pension system, you need to explain to people the difference between a defined benefit pension system and a defined contribution system, and why when the market hits the skids, that hurts defined benefit providers like governments and causes them to have to pay more money. And when you have a media that the traditional media used to cover it, in Detroit, they covered it quite well when Detroit went bankrupt over its pension plan. Chicago and Illinois had a huge pension issue. It got covered there as well. We're going to see these issues come up again as our economy becomes much more uncertain. But the time frame for the media consumer these days, they're not reading long-form articles that explain this. They're looking more at TikTok videos. And so it's up to people like you to explain why it's so important that we have pension reform and how it bankrupts governments and how it bankrupted Detroit, for example.
You were the first prominent politician I heard talking about unfunded mandates for municipalities as well. That's for sure. Talking with Stephanie Miner, her book is Madam Mayor. Name one thing about local politics that the West Wing would never dare show.
Oh, I think the fact that you solve problems and you meet with your constituents and you know them by name. There's no way most mayors run so that they can talk to their constituents and be with their constituents and lead their constituents. And a lot of politicians don't do that. When they run for office, Mayor Daley of Chicago, the second Mayor Daley, used to talk about how he would be so irritated with members of Congress because they could disappear and not answer questions. And he would say, look, I'm the mayor. Everywhere I go, people are asking me questions and I got to answer them, or I have to say to them, I don't know and I'll find out.
You were the first female mayor of a major New York city. Did people treat you like a mayor who happened to be a woman or a woman who happened to be the mayor?
Well, I think, Frank, they treated me like they had never seen an entity like me before. I've always been a woman and I always will be a woman. So it's very difficult for me to parse out the differences. But I would tell you that I had all of these experiences where people would look at me and try to figure out, wait a second, you're the mayor? And also particularly because I was young when I got elected, right. I went to a board meeting of the New York State Thruway Authority, and I ran in late. This was in Manhattan. I showed the security guard my identification, which had my picture and said mayor. And I said to him, I'm running late. I have to go to the meeting. And he said to me, well, when's the mayor going to get here? And I was like, well, I am the mayor. And he was deeply, embarrassed. But again, it just never dawned on him that a woman could be mayor. And that's not, I don't, I just laughed. I wasn't offended or anything, just the reality of it. So there were good parts and bad parts. The good parts of it was that I looked like and I represented change. Mm-hmm. And what more could you want as an elected official or a politician to be the personification of change?
Well
that's
said.
What I was trying to do. Well, the bad part was there was no role model for me to follow. I was making it up as I went along. And then often there were times where I just never thought about something until it happened. When Bob Duffy would hold the door open for me and I would go through it, that was a violation of protocol because he, as mayor of, at the time, Rochester, was a bigger city than Syracuse, so he was supposed to go before me. And so, there's all of these little things that happen, peccadillos, that make great stories. But this is what happens. We have a country where people, there's a constant change, and I think that that's healthy.
The subtitle of the book is Love and Loss in an American City. Would the book have been different if you'd been mayor in, say, Omaha, or is Syracuse central to the story's emotional core?
I don't know, because I don't know Omaha, but I think Syracuse is an illustrative city in the United States, a city that, as we talked about earlier, where there was huge prosperity, where entire families had great jobs with pensions and health care. Entire families lived within blocks of each other. And within a generation, that prosperity became poverty. That's happened, along the Great Lakes, other places in the United States. So what Syracuse has gone through, other cities have gone through. But there are, every city is unique in its own way. And I'm sure there are lots of similarity. I'm sure Omaha has a housing crisis. I'm sure that Omaha has an infrastructure crisis. I'm sure that Omaha is worried about getting health care and getting a good education to its students. All of those things I was worried about as mayor of Syracuse, and I think other mayors across the United States are worried about as well.
What's one myth about mayors that you wish every voter would unlearn?
Well, the old saying, you can't fight City Hall, I would tell you, you can fight City Hall. And in fact, every day, that's what a lot of people do, but they're doing it for their own self-interest. And particularly real estate developers who give very big campaign contributions, they fight City Hall so that they can get what they want. And it's hard to, in this particular political climate, and the fact that you have to raise so much money, local politicians aren't able to raise as much money as congressional politicians and other levels. So the ability of developers to get influence is much greater in local politics than it is in other places because they're one of the few vested interests in local government.
How does PwC take your company to the leading edge? They bring the sharpest minds in tech to your team so you can bring the ideas that will transform your business. They're passionate about your industry so you can walk into any room with every advantage. And they're with you every step of the way so you can know you're headed in the right direction. PwC builds for what's next so you can get there now. Get started at pwc.com/us/leading edge.
This episode is brought to you by Loom by Atlassian. Are you feeling stuck at work? Get your team unstuck with Loom video messaging and move work forward. Use Loom to simultaneously record both your screen and yourself to share a quick update, provide feedback, train a colleague, and everything in between. Plus, add Loom AI to your meetings for instant written notes and recordings. Try Loom today at Loom.com. That's LOOM.com.
This episode is brought to you by GM Genuine Parts and AC Delco. Get the most out of your vehicle with GM Genuine Parts and AC Delco original equipment. The only parts designed, engineered, tested, and backed by General Motors. You can find your perfect fit for most makes and models and choose from 3 tiers of parts, including GM OE or gold and silver aftermarket parts. Visit gmparts.com for more information.
Anyone can follow. It takes something special to be an original, which is why the 2025 Lincoln Navigator SUV arrives with new ways of surrounding you in luxury, including the ultra-wide 48-inch panoramic display and the multi-sensory Lincoln Rejuvenate experience. A true original never stops evolving. So meet the 2025 Navigator, the original that's all new and better than ever. Learn more at Lincoln.com. Lincoln and Navigator are trademarks of Ford or its affiliates.
People who have followed your wars over the years with Andrew Cuomo may be surprised to learn this, but you were a great admirer of Mario Cuomo. What drew you to Mario Cuomo so powerfully as a young person? You describe worshiping him from afar. What about him or his message resonated with you on such a deep level?
Well, on the first part was his oratory and watching him give a speech and the passion that he had and was able to convey was just breathtaking. And then I had a chance to work for him as a very young person, and I got to see him. I got to see how he handled difficult questions, thorny issues, how he worked with people, and how he valued ideas and wanted to solve problems. And he saw it as a noble way to engage people and to try to make things better. So the fact that he elevated ideas and he was sort of a philosopher king, but at the same time loved being with people and loved mixing it up and had great talent.
We talk with Stephanie Miner. Her book is Madam Mayor. And Stephanie, I know it's late, but bear with me a few more minutes because it's so much great content here, and I could talk with you for hours. And I know I'm pushing it, but hang with me. How on the subject of Mario Cuomo, and I've been in this position with some of the people that I really admired and listened to in the radio business, and I then got to work with them. How did it feel to go from admiring someone from the back of the room to sitting in a car with them talking politics and law?
It was crazy, and I felt like I was having this kind of out-of-body experience, but I was very young, so I didn't realize how special it was. I was just trying to impress him by being the best worker and answering all the questions that he had. And so I felt really fortunate to have the opportunity. And I thought I would never have a better job than working for him because it was so fascinating and interesting. But, I did. I ended up being mayor of the city of Syracuse much, much later. And I'll tell you, it was the greatest opportunity I've ever had.
One of the parts of your book that really resonated with me, because something similar happens with me, I also have a nervous tic where I kind of twirl the back of my hair from time to time, which I've worked on. But you're very candid about your physical reaction to nervousness, turning beet red. How did you learn to manage that in such a high-pressure political environment?
Well, I learned to manage it by wearing different clothing. So I wore scarves all the time. And very few people knew that the scarf was to cover up the fact that I would get beet red, starting in my rib cage and moving all the way up to my ears and my face. The people on my staff knew it. But what I was blessed with was, while you could see me get red in the face, I never stammered, I never stuttered, I never had any other twitches. So I learned to deal with it. And then after you're mayor for a while, after you go through a couple of crises and cycles, I learned, I never panicked. And so emergencies became other people's emergencies, and I would learn this is just something we have to get through. So when you deal with real life and death situations as a mayor, people who are screaming to you about pretend life and death situations don't make you as upset anymore. It's a great way to really learn your priorities.
You talk a little bit about your time with Geraldine Ferraro. Most people know her from her run for vice president in 1984, but you actually worked on her campaign for U.S. Senate. A really interesting anecdote, really interesting detail about Geraldine Ferraro keeping a map tucked in her wallet. Explain to folks what that map was and how did that moment reshape your understanding of political ambition and emotional investment in elections?
So I worked for Geraldine Ferraro when she ran for the Senate, and she came very close to winning the primary. I mean, they came close to doing a recount. She lost by that, the thinnest of margins. And afterwards, she came up to Syracuse and upstate to do a thank you tour. And I just happened to be standing next to her. She was about to give a speech in Coleman's restaurant in Syracuse, which is a fairly famous place. And as she went to grab her notes, she grabbed her wallet and this piece of paper, a newspaper clipping fell out. And I bent down to pick it up. And I saw that it was a map that had been printed in the New York Times. I'm pretty sure it was the New York Times. Of all of the counties in New York State and who had voted for her versus who she had lost to. And if you looked at the map, you would see, based on geography, she had overwhelmingly won. But of course, geography is not population. And what I realized when I picked it up, and she said to me, "Oh, it's silly, this." She was embarrassed that I had seen it. And I just realized, election losses are deeply unsettling to the candidates, even when they say everything's fine and, I'll come back to fight again, as Geraldine Ferraro did. But, you put your heart and soul into it, and sometimes you win and sometimes you lose. Thus the subtitle of my book, Love and Loss in an American City. That was one of those instances where I saw what loss did to Geraldine Ferraro.
Wow. Hey, what was the deal with those turkey sandwiches? Did you ever find out who started the no mayo rule, or if Cuomo ever noticed them?
Well, the story that I was told was they had to be, the story that you're referencing is everywhere the governor traveled, the staff that worked for him was told to get 10 turkey sandwiches, no mayo. And I never saw, and you're supposed to get them donated, and I never saw Governor Mario Cuomo eat one. I was told by the staff that there was supposed to be no mayo because Mrs. Cuomo thought he was gaining too much weight and she was worried about his health. And then I was told by other staff members that really the turkey sandwiches were to be eaten by the young starving staffers who were working with him and staffing him on all of these places. But it was such a part of the Cuomo world that apparently one Thanksgiving, Mario Cuomo said at the governor's mansion, I can't even look at any more turkey because, again, every time he traveled, there were turkey sandwiches.
You before I let you go, and I would love to do a part 2 with you because there's so many great stories in this book. You're not a dragon, you're a little girl. How did you internalize comments like that? Were they more fuel, more frustration, or something else?
Oh, I loved them. I thought they were, and the story you're referencing is when I knocked on the door to get a vote, a voter said to me, "You're not a dragon, you're a little girl." They had portrayed me, my opponents had portrayed me as this battle axe dragon, when in fact, I was 5'3" and very young, fresh looking. And I found meeting people and their honest reactions and what they said to be so refreshing. Like, it made me a believer in humanity and in cities and in neighborhoods, and our ability as Americans to be kind to each other and nice to each other. When you run for office, you will see unbelievable acts of kindness. And I was fortunately, I had a lot of those during all of my campaigns, where people would just be nice and sometimes say quirky things, or sometimes say things that, may have sounded a little odd, or you could have taken them in the wrong way. But, I always thought it was great that I was if I hadn't been running for office, I would have never met these people. I would never have had these conversations. And I felt it was a great opportunity to be able to not be a stranger in any place that I went in the city of Syracuse.
All right. 2 final questions before we run out of time. One, my lone problem with you ever in public life is your decision when I was in charge of the New York State Reform Party to not take our nomination and instead run independently. It turned out you got 50,000 votes, started a new party, which I then became a member of. But a lot of people may find that odd. Why, as a lifelong Democrat, would you run third party? Why not, if you wanted to run for governor yourself, why not run within the framework of the Democratic Party? Why go independent?
Well, I think at the time a lot of people were surprised by it, but time has shown us that we have parties that are polarized, and I was deeply aware of that. As a Democrat from upstate New York, I had a much more mainstream outlook on things versus a Democrat from some of the outer boroughs or even Manhattan. And what I realized was that there weren't a lot of people listening. And I thought by running as a third party and starting a new party that I could garner more interest and have people actually listen to ideas and not be swallowed up by a party apparatus or the status quo or conventional wisdom.
Do you view yourself as a Democrat these days?
I do, but I view myself as a lonely Democrat.
Gotcha, I got it. And last question: someone who would like to be a mayor is Andrew Cuomo. Based on your experience and firsthand knowledge, observations, do you think that Andrew Cuomo would be a good mayor of New York City?
I think that the voters in New York City need to make that decision themselves. And what I always say, no matter who I get asked about running for office, is look at their record. And I think if you look at Andrew Cuomo's record as governor, based on what he did during COVID, based on how much we lost in population, based on sort of this idea that there was a lot of yelling and screaming, I'm not sure that he has a record that shows him to be an innovative problem solver that all governments, and particularly New York City, needs right now.
Well said. Stephanie Miner has been my guest. Check out her book, Madam Mayor. It's available on Amazon. It's Miner with an E, but Mayor with an O. Definitely check it out. It's definitely worth reading. Even if you've never been to New York State, you learn a lot about government. You learn a lot about Stephanie. You learn a lot about leadership. Stephanie, I hope we can do this again.
I look forward to it. Thanks again, Frank. It's been a pleasure.
My pleasure. If you want to comment on any portion of our conversation, you could give me a call at 646-720-0635. That's 646-720-0635. This is The Other Side of Midnight. Straight ahead.
American Giant makes great clothing, sweatshirts, jeans, and more right here in the U.S. Visit American-Giant.com and get 20% off your first order with code STAPLE20. That's 20% off your first order at American-Giant.com, code STAPLE20.